Drone attacks on two major oil facilities in Saudi Arabia over the weekend has literally left the world on edge. Here's what happened. On Saturday, a series of drone attacks and possibly attacks with cruise missiles on oil fields in Saudi Arabia ended up disrupting half their supply, equal to 5% of the world's crude supply. Yemen rebels called the Houthis claim responsibility for the attack, but the US doesn't really believe them. They think Iran is responsible. The Saudis have kept their cards close to their chest and are not really pointing fingers yet. Meanwhile, global crude prices have spiked, the rupee has taken a hit, and the world is waiting to see what happens next. In the latest, US President Donald Trump has put out a tweet that suggests he doesn't really believe the Iranian denial of not being behind the attacks. He also said earlier that the Americans were locked and loaded. So what happens now? Discussing the implications with me this evening are Pinag Chakravarti, former diplomat and visiting fellow at ORF, R.S. Sharma, former CMD of ONGC Group, Michael Kugelman, Deputy Director of the Asia Program at the Wilson Center, and Narendra Taneja, who's an energy expert and also spokesperson of the BJP. Welcome to all of you and thank you for joining us today. Mr. Sharma, let me begin with your views on the India impact. We've seen assurances since this morning from the Saudis essentially telling India that our supply will not be disrupted. But the spike in crude is what's really going to hit us, isn't it?
Well, I do feel, because as we are getting the more and more news, these disruptions are going to continue a bit longer than initially thought. And I do feel it's a matter of big concern for India, because India is the most vulnerable economy so far as that crude supplies are concerned. Today we are importing about 84% of our domestic consumption. So that's definitely a cause of worry for India.
Okay, Mr. Chakravarti, how do you see the situation now panning out? Of course, it's a cause of worry for India. There are estimates, of how this will hit the GDP if crude prices increase by 10%. Like Mr. Sharma said correctly, that we import a majority of our oil. But I want to get your point of view on how this is going to develop, in your view, geopolitically over the next couple of days and actually in the next few hours. We're still to hear from the Saudis. We're still to hear an official statement, possibly going to come later on, from the Iranians. And here you have Donald Trump saying he's locked and loaded. What are the concerns and how do you see this evolving?
Did you ask me? Sorry.
Yes, Mr. Chakravarti, that question's for you.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Well, there are two aspects to this issue. One is the supply of oil disruption in the market, international market, which can be dealt with by, I think, dipping into some of the reserves. We also need to do, I think they need to do, is the damage assessment that has happened there and how quickly they can repair it and come back online. That's one aspect. The other aspect is the geopolitical or geostrategic aspect of where the blame lies. Of course, the Houthis have claimed responsibility. The Houthis are the rebels in Yemen, where Saudi Arabia is fighting a war which I believe is unwinnable, because the Saudi army and the defense forces are incapable of, I think, winning the war in Yemen. And of course, the other aspect of that is the regional rivalry. You can call it the Shia-Sunni rivalry, but you can call it using a more secular terminology, as the two major powers in the Gulf region, the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, both of whom sort of seek to establish their sort of preeminence in the region. But there is, of course, a Shia-Sunni aspect as well. And as you know, most of the oil fields of Saudi Arabia are located in the eastern region, which is very close to, across the Gulf to Iran, and hence easily accessible by drones and other things. I'm not saying that Iran must be blamed for it, but the Houthis have claimed it, but I do not think the Houthis have the capability to either manufacture drones or to, unless they have been trained to do so with drones supplied by some other country, I do not think it's over 1,000 kilometers away from where the Houthis are located.
Yeah.
It's not that simple to fly drones and accurately, and that to arm drones and bomb some of these installations, oil installation in Saudi Arabia. So as it develops, and as Mr. Trump says that they believe that from their satellite pictures and others that the drones came from across the Gulf, which means that they are pointing fingers at Iran. So I think it's quite, and he's also said we are locked and ready to go.
Yeah.
I do not know whether this will lead to some kind of retaliation on some Iranian assets. We have to wait and see.
Yeah.
And of course, the oil supplies will of course bother us a lot, because it will, the prices, if they shoot up, they will affect our fiscal deficit also.
No, in fact, there's a DBS report which estimates that a 10% hike in crude will impact the Indian current account deficit by up to 0.5%. So that's bad news for us. Michael, the key takeaway from what the US president perhaps has put out so far is that he's waiting for a verification from the Saudis. And the Saudis have been the least reactive of the lot, in a sense. They've been very careful about what they've said so far, which is nothing much at all. How do you read that situation, and does everything hinge on their next move? I mean, they have to, at the end of the day, say who they think has done this.
Well, I think we have to be careful not to get too far out ahead at this point. As we all know, Trump is a very difficult guy to predict. And, what he said in the tweet sounded very threatening with this whole locked and loaded thing. But let's not forget that until relatively recently, Trump appeared to be wanting to take a more conciliatory approach to Iran. And in fact, it seems that one of the main reasons why Trump fired his former national security advisor, John Bolton, is over an argument over how to treat Iran. Trump didn't want to be as hardline as Bolton wanted to be. So there's that to keep in mind. I mean, he's saying that Trump is saying what he's saying now, but you never know. He could sort of change direction and not want to escalate down the road. But that said, I do think that for Trump and many of his close aides in the White House, there has always been a particular level of hostility toward the Iranians. And it's almost like they're looking for a trigger or an opportunity to try to escalate, and particularly as the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia has grown. So absolutely, I mean, whenever you have an attack like this on such a critical oil supplier like Saudi Arabia, you really have to worry about global energy security implications. And certainly for India, given its energy relationship with Saudi Arabia, which has been intensifying in recent months and recent years, particularly as its energy relationship with Iran has had to be brought back a little bit, given the U.S. sanctions, sanctions on Iran. So, bottom line, we don't want to jump to too many conclusions at this point, because Trump could well turn around and do something very different. But we do have to be very concerned, given how things look right now.
No, absolutely. I mean, the entire situation doesn't hinge on just what Donald Trump tweets. We've had responses from all across the world. The Russians have come in and said that, let's not jump the gun. So have the Chinese. But, Mr. Taneja, I want to get your sense a little bit from the Indian perspective. And just echoing what Mr. Sharma and Mr. Chakravarti said earlier about how vulnerable we get. Now, there's some estimates that crude could jump up to 80. We have seen that situation in India before. We've seen how it hurts us. And right now, when we're already going through a rough patch in terms of economic performance, can we really afford this kind of a hit? How can we ensure that we are more protected? How do you read the situation?
Well, in fact, the bigger worry is that how vulnerable is Saudi Arabia. I've been to both these installations which have been hit. I'm very familiar with these installations. And you see, I mean, Saudi Arabia has always treated all their assets, particularly these two assets, like military assets. They are very, very, tightly protected by their military. So it's a bit of a surprise that, that this happened, which means that Saudi Arabia's oil assets are very vulnerable after this, and that exactly is the anxiety in oil circles across the world, because we all thought that Saudi Arabia's oil assets are very well protected. Now after this, we don't know, and the market that's why reacting the way it's reacting. If you could use just drone and hit the key installations, which means you can hit other installations as well. So that basically leaves not only Saudi Arabia but the world global supply very vulnerable. Now, that said, at the same time, if you look at Saudi Arabia is downplaying it. Somewhere they are probably embarrassed that this happened because they treat those like military assets, very, very precious for them, very precious for their economy, very key for their economy, and therefore, you know, that's why they're downplaying a bit. But we don't know whether they're downplaying because they plan some kind of, you know, they have some strategy in mind. We don't know that. But the reading so far is that probably they're trying to repair. But looking at the damage in the pictures one has seen, satellite pictures, damage seems to be extensive. If that is the case, it's going to take some time. Then what happens in the meantime? That they probably will try to export more from the other side, from the Red Sea side, which they've already offered. But that oil from that area is very, very heavy oil. Which means that, you know, you will need very customized refineries for that. So there are many questions there. So since, as I said, the bigger worry is that how secure is Saudi Arabia and the implications of that on economies such as India or buyers like India. Because we are, when you look at the large economies, we are probably the most vulnerable economy in terms of, you know, oil supplies, because China's dependence is in the region of 50%, but our dependence, as you know, Mr. Sharma pointed out, is in the region of 83 and 84 and only growing. So which means that, you know, and at the same time, oil is central to our economy. We have far more oil economy than even China and the number of other large economies, especially emerging economies.
So from the Indian context, let me come back to you, Mr. Sharma.
Can I complete like you allowed others to speak, you know?
Yeah, sure. I thought you made your point. I'm just moving on to take off from what you said, Mr. Taneja, which is when you said that we are dependent and one of the largest economies, growing economies that are dependent on oil. What are our alternatives, Mr. Sharma? And I'm opening up the debate. If anyone has a point, please indicate and I'll come to you. What are our alternatives then? Even as the Saudis, you know, indicate that they are going to try and get supply back into place at the earliest. What are the options before India? Because the Iran option doesn't seem like a likely one in the current scenario. Yes, Mr. Sharma, that question's for you.
Is it a question for me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, the issue is, as of now, the US has temporarily overtaken Saudi Arabia also as the largest exporter. US has huge surplus inventory, so in the short run, I feel that is not a concern. But as against the initial reports, the damage seems to be much more, the disruption seems to be longer. In that case, I feel for India, there's going to be worry. As of now, US, Saudi both have said that India need not worry about the supply concerns, it will be met. But I feel that will be true for the short run. Long run, we do not know. Short run, I mean to say, had it been a matter of week or 10 days, it's okay. I don't think those kind of assurances will hold good if the disruptions are going to be a month or later. That's a worry. I am repeatedly, that's a kind of worry for India. India has to look for contingency plans where from else the supplies will come and at what price. Issue is supplies will come at what price. That is a major concern. As of today, we have seen the crude prices going up by about 13%. I am afraid tomorrow they will go further up and day after. And if there's no immediate solutions for this supply disruptions to end, the crude prices may really flare up beyond a point that will become difficult for us to manage.
Okay, so let me come to that question. I'm coming back to you, Mr. Taneja. What are our alternatives? You've explained the situation, but now if we have an extended disruption of supply from Saudi Arabia, and you know, like we said, they're not really letting too many people in to figure out what the situation is. Right now it's just assurances. Is India in a position to look at other alternatives quickly enough?
Well, good question, Tamanna. The main point is that I think we need to wait for maybe 2-3 days and see what exactly is on the mind of Saudi Arabia. We don't know. I mean, they're quiet. I mean, are they going, do they think Iran is the culprit, or they plan some action against those who respond? We don't know that. So we'll have to, if that happens, then it might lead to some kind of escalation. we don't know that. As I said, right now it seems that Saudi Arabia is downplaying. Saudi Arabia probably wants that to be business as usual, repair as fast as possible and resume supplies, because that's the kind of very important for the economy, and also given the kind of internal political situation they have, probably is in their interest to play it down and to get back to business as usual, because otherwise Iran is still out of picture at the moment. It's not that you can suddenly start exporting at that level. US has become the biggest player, biggest producer, but they are not the largest exporter. No, that's not the situation, fortunately, unfortunately, yet. Now, so which means that the biggest concern for India, you can still manage supply from other parts of the world, but the biggest problem for India is going to be price. What happens? What we have seen is, if we have seen this kind of thing when the price actually jumped by, in excess of 20%, is the first time we have seen in 28 years. That didn't happen even at the time of Second Persian Gulf War. So which means the markets are really, really worried and very anxious, very edgy. In such a situation, prices to go and touch even $80 per barrel, as an energy expert, I won't be surprised. And if that happens, then there are many questions are going to come up on the surface in India, especially at the time where we are facing challenges in terms of economic growth, we are facing challenges in terms of supply, and there are many other challenges. On the top of it, if we have to pay more, and if the supply also becomes a concern, then I think there are going to be many, many challenges. So there are right now, when you look at the horizon from India, you see many dark clouds, and we'll have to wait for 3-4 more days and to see whether these dark clouds will disappear, or we can find some way we can build our own tunnel to secure energy and so on and forth. I would rather like to wait for 3-4 days.
No, absolutely. But it's this story is bigger. Of course, our immediate concern is what happens to India's energy needs, but it is bigger than that. And that's why I want to come back to you, Michael. And you struck a cautious note, which I appreciate. But can you just lay out for us what are the key markers you're now looking out for? Like I said earlier, we would expect to hear from the Saudis and what their official stance is, maybe within the next 24 hours. It would be unlikely that an attack of this scale would go, and I use that word within quotes, unpunished, that there would be no action coming forth from the Saudis and from America as well. So how do you see this playing out? What are the scenarios that you see playing out?
Well, I think you've just highlighted the key marker, and that is what Saudi says when it finally speaks. It's actually been quite striking that the Saudis have been so quiet at this point. But I think that you're right. Something of this scale would seem unlikely that there would not be any type of response from the Saudis. And of course, when the Saudis look to their closest key ally, who is that state? It's the United States. And of course, the U.S. Relationship with Saudi Arabia has really improved a whole lot in the Trump era, and the relationship with Iran has gone downhill. So there's a lot of sort of key data points here that point to the strong possibility of something very problematic resulting after we get more information from the Saudis. But just to add, I think that the broader point here is that this attack, I think, really does accentuate the energy insecurity of India, a country that is deeply dependent on overseas sources of energy, particularly in very volatile areas like the Middle East. And I think that this attack also accentuates the importance of Indian policy, such as the Act East policy, which is meant to deepen relations with other countries in Asia. And energy does play a significant role in that. You have to hope that India's growing relations with, for example, Vietnam can lead to future opportunities to scale up energy cooperation in ways that can compensate for these volatilities that you have in the Middle East, which will always undercut and threaten Indian energy security when you have an incident like this.
Mr. Chakravarti, why do you think the Saudis are playing it so safe? Is it also because to some extent, and I'm going to take off from an earlier comment that Mr. Taneja made, the scale of the attack and the audacity of the attack perhaps has left the Saudis in a position where they now need to explain how they found themselves so vulnerable? Is that why we're seeing a calibrated and slightly delayed response?
I think one should remember that the drone technology has introduced a very, very a dangerous element into conflict zones, or where there are zones of tension. The drones, there is no known defense against drones, and it is usually visible as, when it really comes overhead, and then you see it. It can evade radar. All the conventional modes of detecting, intrusions by air, drones are very difficult to detect, and we have not yet reached that level of technology. So I think drone warfare is something you cannot defend, and that is why they have used drones, because as Mr. Sharma rightly pointed out, that these oil producing installations in Saudi Arabia, which I have also seen having served in that country, are very well protected, but they were protected in a conventional sense. But you can't have protection against drones. So I think this is a new element, and if this, I think, conflict spreads, and I think we are in for a very bad time, because that would, a conflict when it starts will of course deal a massive blow to energy supplies.
Yeah.
No amount of reserves can deal with that. Reserves can only deal with a very short term, week, a couple of weeks at best. But I think after that, if the conflict starts, and I think then we have a huge problem, and we are all, we will sink. We will all sink together, economically, I mean.
Wow, that's real gloom and doom coming in there, Mr. Chakravarti, and I know you're not one to exaggerate. Over the next 24 hours, why are the next 24 to 48 hours crucial, Mr. Chakravarti? Let me get your perspective on that. And what kind of role do you think India should play at this point? Right now, we're waiting and watching. What should we be doing at this point to secure our energy needs and trying to ensure that this does not escalate to a point which would be harmful for the whole world, really?
I think what is happening here is that that since Iran is not being allowed to export, it is also taking a view perhaps that if I am not allowed to export, why should Saudi Arabia be allowed to export? I am guessing here, I am not blaming Iran, but that could be a logical, sort of a, rational thinking on the part of Iran, that, I am suffering, 60%, 70% of my exports are down. And but what is also very interesting, and if I may add that, is that China's statement has been very interesting. China has said that let us not blame anybody before we have evidence. China is sort of kind of keeping its cards very close to its chest, and don't forget, China has invested a lot in the Iranian oil sector, which can come under pressure and can be jeopardized if there is a conflict.
Yeah.
So China is also watching the situation like we are. I don't think we have a very active role to play apart from reaching out to these countries and urging restraint, which we have done in the past. But I think that is all we can do at the moment.
Yeah. Mr. Taneja wanted to come in. He was reacting when you were speaking. Yes, Mr. Taneja, I think you don't agree with the Iranian theory that Mr. Chakravarti was talking about?
Yeah, not really, because you see what's happening, behind the scene. With the entire world knows that Iran and the US, they are working. They are working on something. We don't know what's going to happen, but there have been reports there might be a summit between the Iranian head of the state and President Trump. And in fact, we were expecting the oil prices, if that happens, oil prices probably may fall to even $50 per barrel. And Saudi Arabia is aware of that. So I don't think that Iran will go to the extent and go and do what they, if they're, and we don't know that. But I think that the important thing is that, in Saudi Arabia, hitting such important key oil installations, it's like hitting sacred places, holy places. I mean, so that's why we don't know what's the reaction of the people in Saudi Arabia, how the Saudi regime is going to, address the issue in terms of the people and the religious leaders and so on and so forth. And the drone again coming from Yemen, that distance is about 1,600 kilometers. I don't think that they have access to that kind of technology that they can actually fly a drone 1,600 kilometers over Saudi Arabia without being detected and master it precisely to the place where they really had hit. So I don't know really. I mean, there are too many puzzles right now. The only thing we know is that whether Saudi Arabia's silence is kind of kind of silence before a big storm, or they probably want to just, go ahead and say, all right, business is more important, money is more important, let's kind of, repair as soon as possible and start the supply. So we really don't know. There's so many things behind the scenes in terms of Iran-US relations, what exactly is going on, and whether the US is in touch with Saudi Arabia on that, and also Iran on that behind the scene, we don't know. So there's so many, that's what I said. Right now, the worry is that, worry is not so much about supply, especially when it comes to economies like India. The bigger worry is the price, because if the price goes beyond $80 per barrel, and which can happen, that's going to be a huge worry for a majority of economies across the world, and more particularly economies like India, which are kind of a little bit more vulnerable, since our dependence on import is so high. As I said, the highest, when it comes to the emerging economy. So these are the worries. I mean, can we play any role there, or can we suddenly go for relations with Vietnam in terms of energy security? And those are long-term things, and we have been working on all those. But we have discovered at the same time there is a limit to what you can do. We are not China that we can go and invest, blindly. We can't do that. We don't have that kind of money. China has done that. China's own production of oil is now a little bit more than even Saudi Arabia. That includes investment they have made in oil assets overseas. I'm including that. If you include that, it's in excess of 10 million barrels a day, which is very impressive. Fortunately, we should have tried to do that, but we know we have our own limits. But as I said, my biggest worry at the moment is that what exactly is on the mind of Saudi Arabia. Are they planning something more drastic which can disrupt the supplies and the price regime further, or is a kind of lull before storm? We really don't know. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed, but I want to share one thing, Tamanna, with you. As an oil expert, energy expert, I'm very worried and I'm very anxious.
Well, absolutely, which is why we're leading the show with this today, because, this may be something which happened in upcake fields in Saudi Arabia, but it's something which is going to impact the whole world and all of us. I just want to come to you, Mr. Sharma, and take off on a point that Michael made a little while earlier. How this situation speaks to India's energy security. And is this an opportunity for us to review how secure we've made ourselves, or the lacuna that really we find ourselves in? Because we are now at the mercy of geopolitical events that frankly we have no control over. Could there have been a better safety net in place?
Well, energy security for India is definitely a very, very serious concern. I fully endorse what Mr. Taneja said in a short while. Amongst the major economies, we are the most vulnerable. No other major economy has the kind of import dependence what India is having, and that's a serious worry. Right now, we do not know. We are just sitting and watching situation helplessly. What happens? The prices go to beyond $80, and well, I have seen a regime prices consistently been ruling higher than $100, going up to $140 plus also, and we know that what kind of chaos that had in the country. So heavy under recoveries for these marketing companies, upstream companies sharing those under recoveries, and the customers exposed to the high prices. So again, that side of sort of chaotic situation right now it's difficult to imagine, because for the last almost 5 years we have seen prices of crude consistently been in and around $50 or $60 kind of range. If they go up, we had seen last year the prices once went up to beyond $80. So marketing companies were asked to absorb up to 1 rupee under recoveries with them, and that had to be compensated later. How that was compensated, I am not aware, but that's a major worry for this all the companies operating in the upstream, downstream companies, and for the Indian consumer also. And the biggest worry, so far as I am concerned, is for the Indian economy, which is already under lot of pressure as of now. So if the prices move up, how that will be coped, we do not know. Right now, we do not know what solutions will be found, but it's going to be quite challenging, quite difficult for us to manage.
Absolutely, absolutely. Some serious words coming in there from top experts, which is why this is I believe, the most important story of the day by far. Because the impact of what has happened in the last 48 hours and what happens in the next 48 hours is going to be far-reaching on not just crude prices and what we pay for petrol and diesel, but for the entire Indian economy and for the global economy as well. On that note, I want to thank all of you for joining us on debate number 1 on the India development debate. We'll take a very short break, but when we come back, we're talking about Hindi and we're talking about English. Does India need a national language, an official one, and should that be Hindi? Comments by the Home Minister Amit Shah on Hindi Divas on Saturday have led to a huge furore. What's the controversy all about? We're coming back with that debate.